Picture this. It's 2026, and the unthinkable happens. Taiwan gets invaded. Europe's eastern border erupts into chaos, and the Middle East becomes a powder keg ready to explode. But here's the twist that changes everything. America doesn't show up. Not because they don't want to, but because a massive domestic crisis or political upheaval keeps them locked down at home. For the first time since 1945, the world's superpower is sitting on the sidelines while everything falls apart. So here's the question that should honestly terrify everyone. Without the United States military, its weapons, its intelligence networks, and its nuclear umbrella protecting half the planet, who actually wins World War III? And more importantly, what does our world look like when the dust settles? Because real talk, the answer isn't what you think, and the consequences are absolutely wild. Let's start with what happens in the first 72 hours. Because those initial 3 days basically determine everything. China makes its move on Taiwan, and without the US 7th Fleet steaming toward the Pacific, there's no immediate deterrent. Japan and South Korea are looking at each other like, okay, what now? Sure, Japan has a seriously capable self-defense force, and we're talking about the 5th largest military budget on Earth, but they've literally built their entire post-war strategy around American backup. South Korea's got roughly 600,000 active-duty troops, and they're no joke when it comes to military tech, but they've also got North Korea breathing down their necks, and without US forces stationed on the peninsula, they're facing a legitimate two-front nightmare scenario. Australia's trying to coordinate something, anything, but their entire navy is like 60 ships total, and they're 8,000 miles away from the action. Taiwan's defending itself with everything they've got, and honestly, their military is more capable than people realize, with about 165,000 active personnel and some genuinely sophisticated anti-ship missiles. But here's the brutal reality. They're facing the People's Liberation Army, which has over 2 million active troops and has been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. Meanwhile, over in Europe, things are going sideways just as fast. Russia sees the same opportunity China does, and decides this is their moment. Without American troops stationed in Germany, Poland, and the Baltics, without US air power dominating European skies, Putin's looking at NATO like it's a paper tiger. And here's where it gets crazy. NATO, without America, is still formidable on paper, right? You've got France with nuclear weapons, the UK with a powerful navy, Germany with the largest economy in Europe. But there's this massive problem nobody really talks about. European militaries have been underfunded for so long that they're running on fumes. Germany's got fewer than 200 operational tanks. The UK's Royal Navy, which once ruled the waves, is down to about 70 ships. France is probably the most capable European power militarily. But they can't be everywhere at once. Poland and the Baltic states are screaming for help because Russian forces are already crossing borders, and the response time from Western Europe is measured in weeks, not hours. So let's talk about what this conflict actually looks like, because it's not like the world wars you learned about in school. This is 21st century warfare, which means it starts in cyberspace before a single shot is fired. Russia and China have been preparing for this exact scenario. And their first move isn't troops, it's knocking out infrastructure. Power grids across Europe start failing. GPS systems go haywire. Financial networks freeze up. Your phone stops working. The internet becomes a mess of propaganda and misinformation. And suddenly governments can't even communicate with their own militaries effectively. China launches the most sophisticated cyber attack in history against Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan simultaneously, targeting everything from military command systems to civilian infrastructure. And here's the thing that should low-key scare everyone. Without US Cyber Command and the NSA backing up these countries' defenses, they're way more vulnerable than anyone wants to admit. Now let's get into the actual shooting war, because that's where things get genuinely insane. In the Pacific, China's trying to execute an amphibious assault on Taiwan, which is literally one of the most difficult military operations imaginable. Taiwan's not going down easy. They've got shore defenses, anti-ship missiles, and a population that's ready to fight street by street. But China's throwing everything at it. Hypersonic missiles, overwhelming air power, and a naval blockade that's choking the island. Japan makes the gutsy decision to actually get involved because they're smart enough to realize that if Taiwan falls, they're next on the menu. Japanese F-35s start engaging Chinese aircraft over the strait, and suddenly you've got two major powers in direct combat. South Korea's torn because they want to help, But North Korea chooses this exact moment to start mobilizing, and Seoul's literally within artillery range of the border. The South Korean military is stuck playing defense on their own peninsula, while their allies are fighting for survival. Back in Europe, it's honestly even more chaotic. Russian forces punch through the Baltics in days because there just aren't enough NATO troops to hold them. Poland becomes the main battleground, and the Polish military is fighting harder than anyone expected. We're talking about a country that has actual historical trauma from being invaded and is absolutely not going to roll over. But they're facing Russian armor, artillery, and air power with limited support from Western Europe, which is still trying to mobilize. France sends troops and aircraft. The UK contributes what it can, but the logistics are a nightmare. Germany's trying to rearm in real time, but you can't build tanks and planes overnight. The Scandinavian countries are fortifying their borders and seriously considering entering the fight, but they're also relatively small militarily and calculating whether intervention means survival or suicide. Here's where things get really complicated, though. The nuclear question. Russia and China both have massive nuclear arsenals, and France and the UK have their own nukes. Without America's overwhelming nuclear superiority keeping everyone in check, the calculus completely changes. France is trying to extend nuclear deterrence to the rest of Europe, essentially saying, if you use nukes, we'll retaliate. But honestly, is Moscow convinced? The UK is sitting on about 200 warheads, which is significant but nowhere near enough to guarantee mutual assured destruction against Russia's thousands. China's playing its own nuclear game in Asia, and the terrifying reality is that without US strategic forces, the barriers to nuclear use are way lower. Nobody wants to be the first to launch, but everyone's thinking about it, and the tension is literally off the charts. Let's talk about what's happening in the Middle East, because obviously it's not staying calm during all this chaos. Iran sees opportunity everywhere and starts making aggressive moves. Israel's facing threats from multiple directions and decides it needs to act decisively before things spiral completely out of control. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states are trying to figure out their next move without American military backing. Turkey's playing this incredibly complicated game where they're technically NATO, but also pursuing their own agenda. The whole region becomes this massive free-for-all where old alliances are tested and new power dynamics emerge. And the oil. Seriously, let's talk about oil. The Strait of Hormuz becomes a choke point that could crash the global economy overnight, and there's no US Navy guaranteeing freedom of navigation. Now here's the economic dimension that people really don't think about enough, but it's absolutely crucial. Global trade basically collapses within weeks. Container ships aren't sailing because shipping lanes aren't secure. Insurance companies won't cover vessels going anywhere near conflict zones. Supply chains that were already fragile after COVID and other disruptions just completely implode. China's economy, which depends heavily on exports, starts tanking. Europe's economy, which depends on imports of literally everything from energy to food, faces catastrophic shortages. Japan and South Korea, both major trading nations, watch their economies crater. And here's the wild part. The US economy is suffering too, even though they're not directly in the fight, because global markets are so interconnected that nobody escapes unscathed. Stock markets worldwide are in free fall, currencies are fluctuating wildly, and people everywhere are dealing with shortages of basic goods. So after months of fighting, what does the battlefield actually look like? Taiwan is either occupied or still barely holding on, but either way, it's devastated. China's military has taken way heavier losses than Beijing anticipated because Taiwan fought harder than expected, and Japan's intervention made everything more costly. The Chinese economy is in recession, possibly depression because of trade disruptions and the massive cost of the war. In Europe, Russia's made territorial gains in the east but gotten bogged down in Poland and faced stiffer resistance than Putin expected. The Russian economy, never that strong to begin with, is in total shambles from the war effort and whatever sanctions other countries manage to impose. European NATO countries have finally mobilized fully, and they're pushing back, but it's been months of brutal fighting and everyone's exhausted. The human cost is staggering. We're talking hundreds of thousands of casualties, millions of refugees, and entire cities reduced to rubble. But here's what really matters. Who actually wins this thing? And the honest answer is nobody, not in any meaningful sense. China might occupy Taiwan, but at what cost? Their economy's wrecked. They've lost huge amounts of military equipment and personnel. Other Asian nations are now completely hostile toward them, and they've got Japan, who they really don't want as a military enemy, now fully rearmed and ready for round two. Russia might grab some territory in Eastern Europe, but they've destroyed their economy, burned through military resources they can't replace, and proven that their military isn't nearly as formidable as everyone feared. European NATO is still standing, but traumatized and economically devastated. The whole world's economy is in depression-level conditions. Millions are dead. Nuclear weapons might have been used in limited strikes, which crosses a threshold humanity never wanted to cross. And here's the thing that's going to stick with you. This scenario shows exactly why American global military presence, as controversial as it sometimes is, has been preventing major power conflicts for 8 decades. Love it or hate it, the U.S. military and its alliances have been the main deterrent keeping countries from trying exactly what we just described. Without that deterrent, without the threat of American carrier groups showing up, without U.S. air power and intelligence and logistics supporting allies, the calculations completely change for aggressive powers. The world order that's existed since 1945 depends on American military might way more than most people realize. But let's be real about the aftermath, because that's honestly just as important as who wins the battles. Assuming the fighting eventually stops, and it has to, because eventually everyone runs out of resources and will to continue, you're looking at a completely reshaped world. Asia's power structure is fundamentally different. China might technically control Taiwan, but faces hostile neighbors on every side, and an economy that'll take decades to recover. Japan's probably fully rearmed with an actual military again, which changes everything about Asian politics. South Korea's either survived intact or is dealing with North Korean aggression that might have succeeded without American backup. The Pacific Ocean is no longer an American lake, and trade routes that have been secure for generations are now contested waters. Europe's a mess. Russia might hold some territory, but governs a broken economy, and a population that's paid an enormous price for territorial gains. NATO either comes out stronger because adversity forced them to actually fund their militaries properly and unify, or it's fractured because countries couldn't agree on strategy and blamed each other for failures. Germany's probably remilitarized, which triggers all sorts of historical anxieties. France might emerge as the dominant European power by default. The UK's role is diminished because Brexit left them semi-isolated, and they lack the resources to be a major player. Eastern European countries are either occupied, destroyed from fighting, or heavily militarized and paranoid. The global economy takes a generation to recover. We're talking about depression-level unemployment worldwide, currencies that have collapsed, trade systems that need to be rebuilt from scratch, and massive debt from war spending. Technological development slows down because resources are going to reconstruction instead of innovation. Climate change accelerates because wartime production meant burning through fossil fuels with zero regard for emissions, and nobody's focused on green energy when they're trying to rebuild destroyed cities. And here's maybe the darkest part, the precedent it sets. If major powers can fight a large-scale war and survive, even if they're damaged, what stops the next conflict? The nuclear taboo might be broken if nukes got used even in limited strikes. The idea that territorial conquest is unacceptable in the modern world is shattered. Smaller countries everywhere realize they can't count on international order to protect them and start either building up militaries or getting their own nuclear weapons. The world becomes way more dangerous, way more militarized, and way less stable. But there's another possibility that's worth considering. Because history's funny sometimes. Maybe this catastrophic conflict forces countries to finally build genuine international institutions that can prevent war without depending on American power. Maybe Europe actually unifies into a real military and political force that can stand on its own. Maybe Asian democracies form an alliance that can maintain regional stability. Maybe humanity looks at the devastation and decides, collectively, that we need better systems for resolving disputes before they become wars. It's possible. But honestly, history suggests that's not how things usually go. Here's the real answer to who wins World War III without the United States. Nobody wins because modern warfare is so destructive that victory becomes meaningless. The winner is whoever's least destroyed, which is a pretty horrifying definition of victory. The actual winners might be countries that stayed neutral, places like Switzerland, certain South American nations, maybe some African countries that avoided the conflict entirely and can now leverage their position. But for the major powers directly involved, there's no victory parade, no conquered territories that make up for the cost, no strategic position that justifies the human and economic price paid. What this scenario really reveals is how fragile global stability actually is. We're living through a period that's historically unusual. Major powers not fighting each other directly. That's not normal for human history. What's kept it stable is primarily American military dominance and the alliance structures built around it. Take that away, and the restraints on aggression weaken dramatically. Countries that have territorial ambitions or historical grievances start thinking maybe now's their chance. And once the shooting starts, it's incredibly hard to stop because backing down looks like weakness, and leaders would rather sacrifice their populations than admit defeat. So when you really think through what World War III looks like without American involvement, you realize something pretty profound. The global order is way more dependent on US military power than anyone's comfortable admitting. That's not cheerleading for America or ignoring valid criticisms of US foreign policy. It's just the strategic reality. And if anything ever happens that takes America off the table as a military actor, whether from internal collapse, political isolation, or catastrophic domestic crisis, the world we've known since 1945 stops existing. What replaces it is brutal, chaotic, and devastating for billions of people who just want to live their lives in peace. That's not prediction. That's just what happens when the deterrents fail and the restraints come off. And honestly, that should make everyone think twice about wishing for a world where American military power disappears, because what comes after might be way worse than what we have now.